Hello, and let's talk about the vaccines for COVID-19. Recently, news came of promising results in the test for a vaccine that's being developed by the University of Oxford. According to the BBC, trials involving 1,077 people showed the injection led to them making antibodies and T cells that can fight the coronavirus. In fact, in addition to the Oxford vaccines, 4 other vaccines are entering clinical trials already. This provides some hope in difficult times with cases showing no signs of decreasing, especially in countries such as USA, Brazil, and India. So, what are the implications of these trials, and how long do we have to wait? NewsClick's Prabir Purkayastha and Dr. Satyajit Rath discuss some of these issues.
Satyajit, it could welcome information. We now seem to have at least 4 vaccines which are going into 4 phase 3 trials.
Oh, absolutely. It's welcome news. It's not surprising news at all. At this stage, any surprises would have been unpleasant surprises. So I'm glad that there are no surprises in this. All of these have been tested in at least 2 animal models. And what they did in those animal models, they seem to be doing in these small-scale human trials. So I think that we are on track. All of them have entered phase 3 clinical trials already.
Except the Moderna, which has yet to start its physical trial.
Well, they're doing the paperwork and need to recruit. So, clinical trials are starting in 5 different locations across the world. In the UK, in China, in the US, in Brazil, in South Africa. So
also in the United Arab Emirates.
Oh,
even they have a center where it is being tested.
Yes, they do.
One of the Chinese vaccines is being tested there.
So, I think that these are expected good results, but they are small steps. They are an initial, very small step. What do these 4 reports that everybody is talking about, which have come more or less coincidentally together, what do they tell us? They tell us some definitive evidence and they tell us some indicative information. The definitive evidence is that all 4 of these vaccines are safe, or let me be correct, all 4 of these vaccine candidates are safe over the short term.
Okay. And on a small number.
On small numbers. It's noteworthy that 2 of them are based on adenoviral vectors and 2 of them are based on RNA formulation.
No, I think there's one virus which the Chinese are doing, which is actually inactivated virus.
The current report that we are looking at is the Chinese adenovirus 5 vector-based vaccine.
That is correct.
The inactivated vaccine report has come early.
Yes, but that's also entering phase.
So in that sense, there are 5 candidates in play.
How is it 5? I'm just wondering.
There
Moderna is one. AstraZeneca
Moderna's RNA. There is BioNTech, Pfizer's RNA.
Okay, Pfizer's one also you were talking.
There is the chimpanzee adenovirus. There is the Chinese adenovirus, and there is the Chinese inactivated virus. In fact, what I'm trying to say is that we are going to see an acceleratingly large number of these reports coming out in the coming weeks. Because if you look at, for example, if you look at the WHO status update document on the WHO site about vaccines, the latest is, I think, dated the 20th of July. So it's not that out of date or anything. And in that tabulation, there's a fair number of vaccine candidates which are in phase 1.
Oh, that's very large.
So those results are going to start coming up in the next few weeks. So we are going to have, it doesn't matter, 3, 4, 5 candidates. We are going to see many more in the coming weeks. And I suspect that in all of them, the first result from the human trials are going to say exactly these 2 things.
But let me interrupt you for a minute over here. While the Chinese 2 viruses and the AstraZeneca, they seem to have done a sufficiently, for phase 2, sufficiently large number, 600 to 1,000 or so. But the Moderna is a small sample. It's really only about 6.
Yes, there are significant differences in the numbers.
No.
And, one could always quibble about it all. Keep in mind that the Oxford chimpanzee adenoviral vaccine report that we have, the actual phase 2 level data are not from all samples.
Okay.
In fact, the paper actually specifies correctly that this is a preliminary analysis being reported because all tests have not been as yet completed.
Okay.
So this is why I'm saying that the current step has 2 components. The definitive component, as we said, is that these things seem to be safe when people get injections. Safe over the short term, safe in adults, safe in adults of healthy adults of European ancestry in the main, except for the Chinese trials. So there are caveats, but this is good that they are safe. The non-definitive indicative component of the evidence is that all of them seem to generate antibody responses in pretty much all vaccine candidate recipients. All of these antibody responses seem to show virus neutralization capacity. All of these vaccinees, these vaccine recipients, also generate T lymphocyte responses against
cells are activated.
target. Keep in mind that the antibody level, it can at least be analyzed for, as I said, virus neutralization capacity. The T cell responses at this point have not been, and really, properly speaking, cannot be examined for their protective contribution.
Okay.
So we have definitive evidence
about for a minute.
Indicative evidence about the immunity.
Just to make it clearer to our viewers, the antibody response will be protective. While the T cell, at the moment, we cannot say what will be the protective response. How do you can you elaborate a little on that?
So you can measure the antibody response in ways that don't tell you whether that antibody response is likely to be protective or not.
Okay.
But you can also do so-called virus neutralization tests with the antibodies. And if they show the capacity for virus neutralization, then it's a reasonable piece of information that they may be protected. They're likely to be protected. It's not evidence of protection, but it says they're likely to be protected. Exactly similarly, you can test to see whether there are T cell responses, and there are. But at this point, nobody's done even indicative tests to ask whether the T cell responses have any antiviral capacity.
Okay. They get awake, but we don't know whether they can attack and destroy the virus. That's what it really means. Or the cells which get infected and therefore take out
to be fair, those are much harder tests to do. The virus neutralization tests for antibodies are hard enough to do, which is why the results between the 4 papers are for fine readers. The results are a mess, but broadly they still say this.
So we know now there is antibody response. We know now there is T cell response. We know that the antibodies may be able to neutralize the virus in case of an infection, but we do not know whether the T cell response will be able to do so or not, at least definitively. So that's where we are at the moment. And that's why, of course, you need larger scale trials to test it through the fire, so to say, of the actual large scale exposure to infection, and as well to see whether there are any possible side effects which can also be harmful.
Absolutely. So there are additional nuances to this especially when you consider all four reports that are
Still not adding the fifth one, which is also entering clinical trials, because we don't seem to have a report about it, or at least not recently.
so. The interesting thing is that the adenoviral vaccines as well as the RNA vaccines, on the one hand, they're safe. On the other hand, they're pretty damned painful.
They're pretty damn painful.
If you look at the data, they the amount of redness, swelling, local tenderness, a little bit of fever, all of this is quite notable. So for people of sufficiently advanced stage such as you and me, it is reminiscent of the vaccines that we used to take when we were children, where the arm would swell and you'd feel horrible and miserable for a day or two, and so on and so forth. Now, is this a huge problem for these vaccines? On the one hand, no, in the sense that these are transient effects, they'll pass, and if the vaccines work, it's well worth it. But in this day and age of social media mediated amplification of anti-science, irrational, anti-vaxxer movements, this is something to be considered about how successful implementation and acceptability of these vaccines would be.
Well, that hopefully will be more in the United States, that for some strange reason, there is a strong body of people who do not believe in science, believe in even in flat earth. By the way, their numbers are also growing, and of course the anti-vaxxers. But coming to the question of ill effects, possible ill effects, the Moderna report seems to indicate that a few more, shall we say, beyond pain effects have also been observed. Is that correct?
Well, you know, they've reported one severe effect, I think. Frankly, I'm not inclined at this point to be judgmental about it.
So it could be, if we have a much larger sample, we'll find that this is an out.
I think that the data and safety management boards have all correctly generally supported movement forward into phase 3, and in the phase 3 we will see what the results look like. Keep in mind that the numbers in terms of the magnitude of immune responses of the Moderna vaccine seem to be larger than that, for example, of the Oxford vaccine. Now that brings up the second of my particular bees in the bonnet about nuances, because I think that our listeners should be cautious about the interpretations of these numbers. These are not absolute numbers of universal meaningfulness. So in a sense, different tests with different levels of sensitivity would give different numbers. And since these are very different centers doing their own tests, depending on the local configuration of the test, the numbers would look quite different. In fact, if you look at the Oxford vaccine reporting paper, they've done 3 different virus neutralization tests. And the numbers in the 3 virus neutralization tests are completely different from each other. So I think that it's important to keep in mind that these absolute numbers may not mean anything other than technical differences.
Yes, I guess also the ultimate test will be, do they protect us or they don't?
Absolutely.
And the numbers are only very rough indicators, and they don't really tell us where it will protect and where it will not. Plus, what you were saying, the calibration of the numbers itself is a problematic issue because they're not calibrated to a common quote unquote viral utilization standard. So these are the caveats we have to take into account. But the bigger caveat, we don't know how long if there is protection, how long the protection will last.
Absolutely.
So that's other big iffy in this game. That if some of the reports are true, it is possible that we might need to have vaccines every 6 months, every year, every 2 years, if we are lucky.
Our next story is about the tourism sector in Kashmir. Affected by multiple lockdowns and a brutal communications shutdown for almost a year, those employed in the sector are facing all kinds of issues which have been compounded by the uncertainty in government policy. As we approach the first anniversary abrogation of sections of Article 370, we look at the impact on the sector.
बात हुई थी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन से तो थोड़ा थोड़ा ठीक होने लगा था। हमें भी नज़र आ रहा था कि लॉकडाउन ईज़ हो गया था तो लोगों की इंटरनल मूवमेंट स्टार्ट हो गई थी। तो उसी में गवर्नमेंट ने एक इनिशिएटिव लिया था कि रिवाइवल कैसे करेंगे हम। इसमें हमारे दो मसले थे, सर्वाइवल और रिवाइवल का। तो अब सर्वाइवल के साथ तो हम उनके साथ बात थी कि कोई ग्रांट एंड पैकेज या कुछ ऐसा होना चाहिए सेंटर स्टेट की लेवल पे, तो वो बात उसके साथ साथ चल रही थी। तो अब रिवाइवल का मसला आया था। तो फिर हमारी सेक्रेटरी साहब से भी बात हुई कि गाइडलाइंस क्या होनी चाहिए। तो थोड़ा हमारी भी मैसेजेस बाहर गई, अपने जो हमारे प्रिंसिपल एजेंट्स हैं उन तक ये बात पहुंची थी। वहाँ से भी हमें थोड़ा पॉजिटिव सपोर्ट मिला था। तो उसमें गाइडलाइंस था वही कोविड का कैसे हो, टेस्ट कैसे करना चाहिए, तो वो जो थी निटी वो हमने की थी। मगर अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो फिर से लॉकडाउन हो गया तो ये न्यूज़ पूरे नेशन में फैल गई। तो आजकल तो नेट है सबके पास, तो इस हालात में हम किसी को बुला सकते हैं न कोई आने के लिए तैयार होगा। मेरे को लगता है ये सब फ्यूटाइल है एज ऑफ नाउ। तो जब तक पूरा ग्राउंड लेवल यहाँ पे सही नहीं होगी, पूरे जो लॉकडाउन का मसला है पर एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को भी सोचना चाहिए कि हम कैसे ये रोड मैप बनाए कि टूरिस्ट को यहाँ लाना ईजी नहीं होता है, या जो भी इकोनॉमिकल एक्टिविटीज़ पूरी ठप पड़ी हुई है तो उनके लिए भी उनको सोचना चाहिए कि कैसे एक रोड मैप के तहत हम चले। कोविड के साथ तो अब रहना ही रहना है, ये पता नहीं मतलब सालों रहना पड़े, महीनों रहना, अल्लाह बेहतर जानता है। जब तक कोई इसकी कोई मेडिसिन नहीं निकले, कोई ऐसी ट्रीटमेंट नहीं निकले, तो तब तक या तो हमें फिर पूरा ही एक, मैं फिर भी बोल रहा हूँ कि रोड मैप ये होना चाहिए, तो हमें पूरा ठप करके रहना चाहिए बिल्कुल। जो इकोनॉमिकल एक्टिविटीज़ हैं, जो भी कोई एक्टिविटी है रिगार्डिंग हमारी रोज़ी रोटी के बारे में, तो या तो हमें वो बिल्कुल पता होना चाहिए कि हमें कैसे चलना है। नहीं तो ये भी हमारे यहाँ एक फिर वो तजर्बुज़ रहता है कि आज खुल जाएगा कल बंद हो जाएगा, इट्स नॉट ईजी।
लेकिन सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम है जब से ये नया लॉकडाउन 3 इम्पोज हो गया हमारे ऊपर, तो पहले हमको अपने आप को बचाना है। तो टूरिस्ट के लिए हम क्या करेंगे? तो उनको पता नहीं है, आवाज़ बाहर चली गई कि 21 दिन का और लॉकडाउन है कश्मीर में। तो सभी कोई सोचेगा कि वहाँ पर जब उनके लिए लॉकडाउन, तो मैं वहाँ घूमने के लिए क्या करने। SOP करना चाहिए पहले, वो हमारे साथ वो फैसिलिटीज़ क्रिएट करनी चाहिए। और ख़ासकर श्रीनगर में जो भी अभी क्वारंटाइन सेंटर है वो श्रीनगर में ही है, चाहे होटल है चाहे गेस्ट हाउस है। जो इसमें ट्रांसपोर्ट वाबस्ता लोग हैं तो वही उनको एक जगह से दूसरी जगह ले जाते हैं। पहले तो इसको फ्री करो उससे। अभी लॉकडाउन किया, एक एरिया तो खुला है, दूसरा इलाका बंद है। एक जगह से प्राइवेट गाड़ियां चलती है तो दूसरी तरह से ट्रांसपोर्ट चलता है। अब पता नहीं है ये लॉकडाउन है, बंद है या कुछ और है। हम कब कंफ्यूज है इसमें। हमें करना क्या चाहिए और करना क्या होगा गवर्नमेंट को, कोई बात क्लियर नहीं आ रही है।
यहाँ का जो टूरिज़्म डिपार्टमेंट है वो भी बहुत वार फुटिंग पे ये कोशिश करा कि यहाँ पे टूरिज़्म आ जाए। और अगर यहाँ पे टूरिज़्म आ जाए तो वो एक अच्छी पहल होगी, क्योंकि जितने भी यहाँ पे शोबा सयाहत से जुड़े हुए हैं आज की इस तारीख में सब इस वक्त बेहाली की ज़िंदगी बसर कर रहे हैं।
That's all we have time for today. We'll be back with more news from the country tomorrow. Until then, keep watching NewsLink.